It's the Big Me Kickoff. I am your host, Kevin Noon. It is Thursday, December 1st. And yes, obviously, we're coming to you off of some bad news in terms of how the game broke down. But fear not, all hope is not lost at this point, or at least we hope so. The Ohio State Buckeyes are sitting number 5 in the latest college football playoff rankings. And the good news there, good news may be a little bit of a stretch, but the promising news there is that Ohio State would be the first team potentially in if a team should stumble. We know that Georgia, we know that Michigan are both likely in. What about TCU? What about USC? Both teams have big time games coming up starting on Friday with the Pac-12 championship game. And then we have the Big 12 championship game on Saturday. Could TCU be ripe for an upset? Could USC? Well, in this edition of the Big Me Kickoff, we are going to be talking to writers that cover each of the teams that are going to be going against those two, Kansas State and Utah, to get the latest to see if the Buckeyes can maybe sneak into the playoffs and keep the season going on there, as opposed to going off into more of a meaningless exhibition game in just a standard bowl game. But we'll have to kind of wait and see, but stay with us. Let's start off with the Pac-12 championship game. That is on Friday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, and we're joined by a good friend of the site, Alex Markham of UteNation.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Alex, welcome to the show.
Kevin, my old friend, how are you, man? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We got to spend a little time together last year in that 48-45 Rose Bowl barn burner, defense optional, I guess. But now Ohio State fans are going to be pulling for the Utes with going against the USC Trojans, about a 3-point line at the time of recording this. And second time around playing against USC, you guys, Utah hosted SC earlier in the season, and now gets to go for the sweep. And, before we even get to SC in particular, we all talk about how difficult it is to beat a team twice. Utah showed kind of the book on that last year, had to beat Oregon twice to get to the Rose Bowl to face Ohio State.
They did, I'll be honest that sometimes it takes a generational talent to be able to help you pull that off. And that's what Devin Lloyd was last year, he made that crucial pick 6 in that championship game. And then it was done. Like they were defeated. Right. USC definitely has a much better quarterback than Oregon did last year, which Oregon's quarterback last year was kind of a detriment to them. You're probably looking at a CFP team last year with Oregon if they had like a worthwhile quarterback, to be honest. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. I wish I could pull up this article that one of my guys does that he did last year right before that Oregon game. And he does these statistically speaking pieces, and yeah, it's not the easiest. It really isn't, and so there's different things that you got to look into it with, whether USC fans want to admit it or not, this is definitely a rivalry game to an extent. The USC program and the Utah program, at least up until this new USC staff would admit that. So all bets are off, and like so many different statistical things you just kind of throw out the window, right? But yeah, it's there's plenty of different things going on with the teams since that meeting as well, because of when it took place in the season. So I'm looking forward to it, man. It's going to be fun. The beauty of it for Utah is, they can sit back and say, been there, done that, don't count us out. We know what it takes to win on this stage, and hell, they've been there 4 of the last 5 years. Kyle Whittingham jokes around and says, he's like, we've been to the last 4 Pac-12 championship games, because he jokes around saying, he's like, nobody counts COVID year, right? But yeah, man, it's going to be a fun game to watch.
How are these teams different? Because there are some differences between meeting 1 and meeting 2. Utah does not have Tavion Thomas, who shut it down for the year.
It's yeah.
And then on the other side, USC doesn't have Travis Dye, who's been knocked out for the year. You and I traded some text messages as we were setting this up. There were some concerns amongst just fans who don't follow Utah about maybe what the health of the Utes team is. I mean, what are some of the differences going into this, and maybe what are some of the similarities just for fans that are going to really get their first opportunity to watch with more than just a passing eye?
Yeah. So first off, I mean, one of the biggest things, I mean, Ohio State didn't get to see how good Utah's defense was last year. I mean, especially when you're down to a running back playing cornerback, right? I mean, they were really hampered injury wise. Even at that, Devin Lloyd was hurt in the game, and their top defensive end. So Ohio State didn't get to see just how good of a defense Utah can actually have, right? And they had a lot of guys coming back this year. They lost some key guys, but at the same time too, the defense really struggled the first half of the season. And one of their biggest issues was with containment on the edges. That really kind of reversed course in the second half of the USC game. If you listen back to Kyle Whittingham's press conference, and I completely agree on this because this is something I've been talking about before, that's where their fortunes really kind of started changing. And you started seeing that nasty, relentless ball hawking Utah defense that so many people know Utah for. So that's a huge key thing right there. Okay. Additionally, on all that stuff, you mentioned Tavion Thomas. Man, I'll choose my words carefully on this, but Tavion Thomas was a detriment to that Utah football team. They're better off without him. And yeah, there's a lot more that just went into it than him just making an announcement that he was stepping away from the team and focused on the draft because of a toe injury. So, within that, Utah had transitioned quarterback Jaquindon Jackson, who was I can't remember what he was rated with Rivals, but he was extremely high as an athlete. Went to Texas as a quarterback, transferred to Utah. Really, really good athlete, really good runner. Just wasn't going to work out at quarterbacks. And so when Utah started having running back issues this year, they started transitioning him. It's clicking for him now, and it's scary. He's 6'2", 230 pounds. And if you go watch the Colorado highlights, he busts away from everybody on a 66-yard run, and he hits that second and third level speed where he is busting past everybody. It's not close. So there's positives for Utah on that. And now, USC lost Travis Dye, but Austin Jones has stepped in and done really, really well. I'd almost argue that their run game's even better now with Austin Jones. And I wasn't expecting that with him being a transfer coming over from Stanford. So yeah, and there's, and USC's done a lot more from what I've been told, and I've got to go take a look back at the film, right? But they've done a lot more with, they'll mix up their offensive personnel packages, but USC will go a lot more recently with like 11 personnel. If you ask me, that's to Utah's benefit. So who knows how much you see on that. Because that adds a tight end and takes away a wide receiver, obviously. So, it's and additionally, Cam Rising has been hurt. He started stepping up, and it seems like his passes are more crisp, and like he's gotten more and more over his injury now. So that's another key thing right there, because I mean, Cam Rising was he outdueled Caleb Williams, in that last game, which says something, because I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Caleb Williams. I could do without his arrogance to an extent, but there's no denying, the arrogance and the FUCKND on the fingers, it's you don't do that stuff. You just don't, and so Cam Rising is the complete opposite of somebody like him, and somebody that people want to get behind, and so it's going to be a fun battle to see, and just hopefully Cam is just progressing that much more, even compared to how he was looking against Colorado, because he was throwing some lasers.
I'm not going to put any predictions into your mouth, but for the sake of the Ohio State fans that are watching, why does Utah win this game?
I mean, haven't you already seen everybody's ticket in USC for the college football playoffs? I mean, there's a dude that's put a $900-something-thousand bet on USC on the betting line. Caleb Williams is going to win the Heisman. Man, like that's the one thing. Utah plays well with the chip on their shoulder. Um, Ohio State and Utah, they both were down their guys last year in that bowl game. And, still, people weren't giving Utah a shot. Look what happened. That was one hell of a game. And that's the one thing I can say too, just not to sidetrack is, there's two fan bases that I've really been around that are like upper echelon football programs, right? That it's like, you can't say a bad thing about them, that they were good to Utah fans, and you actually you enjoyed being around them, and it was intelligent conversations. And it's Ohio State for me and Oregon. USC not so much. I'm sick and tired of their complaining about the officiating and them trying to say that the officials have things rigged for Utah. But no, I mean going back to all that stuff, Utah plays well with the chip on their shoulder, man. And I'll say this too: when you have to when you have to stack all your chips, you can bet damn good and well that Kyle Whittingham, as good as Morgan Scalley is as a defense coordinator, you can bet damn good and well that Kyle Whittingham is going to have his handprints all over this defense on Friday. That's going to make it that much more difficult. And Cam Rising, again, he's been hurt. He's getting healthier. Cam, when he's healthy and when he's right, and especially against the Trojans, because I mean that was his backyard growing up. Dude plays on another level. So there's a lot of things to like. Obviously you got to hope that Dalton Kincaid is going to be able to play, because he went for 16 catches, I want to say 234 yards and a touchdown against USC. USC knew it was coming to him, and they couldn't do a damn thing. He should be able to play, what I've been told. And, I've got to be careful with the injury stuff, but I mean, what I've just been told is on his fall, he was really just more sore than anything else. And then it was end of the half, right? And so they did precautionary stuff, and then the starters sat out the last portion of that half anyways. So I fully expect Dalton to play and cause fits for USC again. So
last question on there. We've talked a lot on the offensive side. A player on the defensive side for Utah that Ohio State fans were well aware of because of recruiting and then the Rose Bowl and everything. Just how good has Clark Phillips developed into, and how big of a role could he have in this game in trying to lock down a very strong passing offense from, quote unquote, the already pre-anointed Heisman winner?
Well, let's just say that wouldn't it be nice for Ohio State fans to be able to root on Clark Phillips for a change and be going nuts when he's running another pick six back, right? So he's leading the nation in interceptions this year. I believe he's tied, but still, maybe with one or two other people. And he's returned two, I don't think three, I think two pick sixes back already for this year. So he's a game changer. Williams will probably get a little big for his britches and try to throw his way, and it's the perfect stage and scene for Clark to showcase himself on, because he's not going to come back next year. There's no way. I mean, he's done everything he's needed to do. Everybody raves about him out west and nationally now too. I mean, you're seeing, right? But it's kind of fun. That was an interesting recruiting battle, because I know, Ohio State didn't want to lose him. I know Ohio State players were texting him while he was on his Utah trip, trying to, motivate him and keep him that way and stuff like that. But, look, honestly, Clark couldn't have gone wrong going to either school, because, everybody might look at it and be like, oh, well, Utah, I mean, Utah's proved their worth the last bunch of years, right? And Utah's cornerback coach, Sharif Shah, honest to God, man, he's one of the best in the business. And those two just it's a match made in heaven with coach and player, with just how they sync up with each other and their football IQs and just their work ethic and how they go about it. So he's been fun to watch. He's a class act for the university, and everybody's really going to be looking forward to seeing what he does in the Pac-12 championship game. And then, I'm a positive thinking person, right? So let's just say Pac-12 championship game, the Rose Bowl, and then seeing him go through the draft process and do well at that.
There you have it. Those are the reasons why Utah is going to beat USC, or at least for what we're saying here for the purposes of the Big Me Kickoff show. But Alex, I want to thank you for being part of the show, helping us put a little sanity in Buckeye Nation as they are pulling for one or two upsets to get their ticket punched to the college football playoff.
I appreciate it, Kevin. Hey, go Buckeyes.
So there you have it. That is the first game, Friday night, 8 p.m., the Pac-12 championship game. Now let's move forward to Saturday, a noon kickoff Eastern, Big 12 championship game, Kansas State and TCU. And we're joined by Derek Young of K-State Online, part of the On3 network and a friend of the show. And Derek, how are you doing, man?
I am pretty good. It's kind of interesting to be back on an Ohio State show again.
I know, and it's been a minute since Ohio State fans have really had to think a whole lot about K-State. So now Ohio State, its destiny is not in its own hands. And if Utah's not able to knock off USC, the next best shot and the last best shot for Ohio State to get in is a K-State upset. Do we call it an upset when it's a 2.5, 3-point line of TCU, the media darling that just doesn't want to die. It just, the game control is about zero for this squad, but they're sitting there perfect 12-0. These two teams played earlier in the season, and we're being quite honest with ourselves. It took a lot of things to happen for K-State to drop that one.
Yeah, they were up 28-10 in the second quarter, and quite frankly, they ended up down to their third string quarterback in the third quarter for two different series. One ended up in a turnover on downs. Another one ended up in an interception that set up another TCU score. If that doesn't happen, Kansas State has every right to believe that they would have won that game. And to be honest, their season looks a lot differently too at that point as well. And maybe they're in the playoff discussion at some point if that goes their way. They lost Adrian Martinez in the first drive of the game. Then Will Howard comes in at quarterback, who's still the quarterback, and I believe threw for 4 touchdowns, and that really sparked his season. And it's just the injury bug really bit him that night. It wasn't even just Will Howard. It wasn't even just Adrian Martinez. I don't know if obviously Ohio State fans probably weren't tuned into that game very much, but Kansas State lost their starting linebacker with a rib injury, and he missed 3 quarters of that game. Deuce Vaughn, household name for Kansas State, one of the best running backs in the country. He missed 2 full quarters that game because he got hurt. That was one of those nights for K-State where they kind of just ran into a lot of bad luck. It was one of those games where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and even then they still had every chance to defeat TCU. They also missed 2 field goals.
So, injuries, just bad luck all around. How, now going into Saturday's game with TCU, Will Howard's the quarterback. Adrian Martinez is still kind of in the wings. You talk about Deuce Vaughn, you talk about the starting linebacker. How healthy is K-State? How much of its full complement of weapons will TCU face this time around, and hopefully for the sake of just good football through 4 full quarters?
Yeah. Hopefully they stay healthy throughout the game as well. As you said, Kansas State's probably healthier right now than they were that game. Now, they have some guys back that they didn't have that game, but they are also down a safety that they lost for the entire remainder of the season a few weeks ago, and Kobe Savage that plays a pretty integral role for their defense. But they're pretty healthy. Deuce Vaughn's probably not 100%. He got caught from behind like twice last week, and he's still a really good football player. No one wants to face him. But if he's 100%, I'm not sure anyone in the country thinks he's going to be caught from behind. But he's still a weapon. Adrian Martinez might be back. Even though he's back, he's probably not going to play unless absolutely necessary. But we've seen TCU. They played 12 games. They're 12-0. I think they've knocked out the starting quarterback in 10 of their 12 games. So it's nice to have Adrian Martinez back just in case that has to happen. But with Will Howard, I mean, Kansas State went from the number 4 offense in the Big 12 to now, if you go by points per drive and yards per play, Kansas State's number 1 offense in the Big 12. They even passed up TCU on the offensive standpoint and are averaging over 4 points per drive in their last 5 games. I think top 10 offense when Will Howard's under center in the country at this point. Felix Anudike-Uzomah, probably going to be an NFL defensive end in the first 2 rounds at some point. I think he's getting healthier. Julius Brents was actually another. He's going to be an NFL corner. He used to play at Iowa. He's Kansas State's best corner. He got hurt in their first meeting with TCU, and he's going to be back, and he's 100%. So I think the Horned Frogs are definitely going to get Kansas State's best shot.
As somebody who watches the Big 12, I mean, why? How has TCU been able to do this? How have they managed to be able to defeat, so many times?
Yeah, there's always a couple of teams each year that are really, 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 really good, but they have a lot of bad luck. And there's always some teams that are, pretty solid, pretty good, but they have great luck. I mean, obviously I know Ohio State's history. 2002 is a really good team, but they had a lot of luck go their way that year too. This kind of seems like TCU's year in terms of the luck, the ball bouncing their way a lot of different times. They're knocking out, how many starting quarterbacks. They haven't. I don't know if they played a really good quarterback that played all 4 quarters yet this year on them. So they're just been very fortunate. Their defense has come a long way. It was really rough at the beginning of the year, and they were just outscoring teams. They've started to figure out that side of the ball, and everyone knows Max Duggan. He's a pretty good quarterback. He's having a career year, but they have one of the best running backs nobody knows about either in Kendre Miller. I mean, Kansas State players raved about him the first time that they played, and even asked a few of them on Tuesday when we had our media sessions, how good is Kendre Miller? And they said the only running back they've even come close to facing this year that's as good as him or better is Bijan Robinson. So there's a lot of respect for what TCU has in the backfield. They've been a pretty a talented team. They recruit really well because they have the Dallas-Fort Worth area to capitalize on in that market. I mean, they have a wide receiver, Quentin Johnston, who's probably going to be a top 15 pick in the April draft. So they're a little bit more talented than probably they're giving credit for, but a lot of fortunate luck, a lot of balls bouncing their way as well this year. They weren't really challenged in the non-conference, right? I mean, their toughest non-conference games were SMU and Colorado. Colorado's not beating anybody this year, so
it wasn't Tarleton.
Yeah, so Tarleton State as well. So they played like the non-conference schedule that Michigan plays every year. So they got that, but that probably was a good thing that helped with their confidence. And in college football, belief and confidence goes a long way.
What is the vibe around Manhattan? Is it we had these guys once before? We know we're going, and I'm not saying from the players because I don't want to put words in their mouths, but from the fans, the supporters. We had them once. We're going to get them this time. Gee, I hope we're going to get them. I mean, what's the confidence level?
Well, one, I think they're surprised and appreciative at the same time that they're getting as much respect as they deserve, because you wouldn't typically expect that to go to a Kansas State team that really doesn't bring the heavy name with it. But the committee has respected them the entire season. But a lot of that is the advanced metrics actually look fondly upon Kansas State this year. They're the highest ranked 3-loss team in America. They're the only 3-loss team in the playoff top 10. There is a lot of confidence, and they knew, I think the fans, the community around Manhattan knew that this year could be a special year just because it's more talented than anyone would typically expect from Kansas State too, right? I mean, people know Felix Anudike-Uzomah. People know who Deuce Vaughn is. And then really they probably were a bit fortunate, and no offense to Adrian Martinez, he was playing well. But when he got hurt, they found out they got a stud in Will Howard, who's been one of the top 5, top 10 quarterbacks in the country since he was inserted into the lineup. So if you took his sample size, I know someone on our staff that did this and kind of, made it into a 12-game schedule, like his pace, he would have thrown for over 3,200 yards this year with 32 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions. So he's playing at an incredibly high level. And because they didn't have anything go their way and still should have won in Fort Worth. I think most people around Manhattan, folks that really know Kansas State, heck, a lot of people that are, follow the Big 12 from start to finish. A lot of the folks that cover from a national standpoint or cover a specific team expect Kansas State to win on Saturday just because they're probably playing better than any team in the Big 12 right now, and that includes TCU. TCU hasn't been as sharp in the last month, notwithstanding last week when Matt Campbell and Iowa State basically decided to tune out the rest of the season and lose 62-14. And by the way, I don't know if Cincinnati can hire Matt Campbell. It's weird that his name's been linked to that job. I don't understand that.
Well, that's for another show, but I don't want to put words in your mouth and make a prediction for you, but answer this question. Kansas State wins this game. Why?
Because their offense hasn't been stopped since Will Howard took over. I know I've alluded to that before, but they're scoring touchdowns on almost 60% of drives with him as the starting quarterback. And he scored 48 on Oklahoma State. He scored 48 on West Virginia. He scored 47 on Kansas. You put 31 on Baylor. That's Dave Aranda's Baylor. You're doing something. They won 31-3 in Waco. When Baylor still had a lot to play for. I mean, Baylor had control of their own destiny, not K-State at that point. So, I mean, it's because they're playing better than anyone else in the Big 12 right now. And I think that TCU got a lot of good shots this year, but they probably got the best shot from Kansas State even when they were shorthanded. And, I mean, I think Kansas State will win, but it will be a shootout. If their team can get even 3 stops on defense, I know that doesn't sound a lot, but that could be the team that wins. I think it's, I've gotten the totals wrong all year. Usually I know who's going to win. I feel good about that, but this one feels like a high-scoring game, but because I feel that way, it'll probably be a defensive, stalwart.
And last thing, who is somebody that we're not talking about enough from Kansas State that Ohio State fans who probably have not watched more than 30 seconds of K-State this year, who's somebody, not a Will Howard, not a Adrian Martinez, not a Deuce Vaughn, who's somebody that people should key in on, and if they're doing well, that it should be kind of an indicator of what this outcome may be.
It probably would be a defensive player then, because if you get enough stops, I think they're winning. Because I don't know that TCU has stopped Kansas State. That's probably a defensive lineman. I'll say Felix Andy-DK-Uzama. He's one of the best defensive ends in the country that people on a national note probably do not know about. Look, he played TCU last year as a redshirt freshman, and that was the game where he had 6 sacks in a single game. And he got a couple taken away from him because they fumbled it forward, and then it was recovered. A weird NCAA rule. But, no, he's kind of been a TCU pain in the butt historically, just in the 3 games that he's played against the Horned Frogs. He's, I think, second in the Big 12 in sacks. He was projected, at least on some mock drafts before the season as a potential top 10 pick. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it would surprise me if he wasn't in the first round or 2. So, no, he's one of the best defensive ends in college football that people don't know about. And then Julius Brent, maybe even at corner, because he can really shut down his side of the field.
There you go. So Ohio State fans have something to hope for there. Derek Young feels good about K-State. In our first segment, Alex Markham feels really good about Utah. One of these happens, Ohio State probably in the playoffs. Both of these happens, I don't know how you keep Ohio State out of the playoffs. But Derek, thank you so much. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We look forward to maybe catching up with you after.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank everybody else for being part of the Big Me Kickoff. I'm not going to drag this out any longer. Until next week, enjoy the games, and hopefully we will see you in the playoffs.